I was talking to everybody, making friends with all these folks, and going out to lunch, sitting with them at lunch, going out to have a beer after school or whatever it would be, just to talk about, hey, tell me about your journey. What was that like?
Welcome to Veteran CEO Magazine, VCEO, where veterans lead the way. I'm Jay Hernandez, and today my guest is Brian Britton, the CEO of Kilwins chocolate franchise. Brian, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me, Jay.
Before you became the CEO of Kilwins chocolate franchise, you had a long history, starting with, let's go back to your time in the Navy. You were a naval flight officer, a mission commander who served in the Navy. And when you got out, you actually transitioned into Walt Disney, had a long career there, working your way up to the VP of Global Operations, Initiatives, and Plannings. And then you transitioned as the COO of Levy Restaurants, later to the CEO of National Heritage Academies. And that's what all brought you to today and this conversation that we have. So as we talk about your career transition, the first question I always have for everybody when they join VCEO is to describe their military transition to civilian life in 6 words or fewer. Brian, what are your 6 words?
Plan would be the first word. The second word would be education. The third would be mentorship. The fourth would be network, as in networking. The fifth is grit, which is great for all military folks. And then the last, and not least, and probably most important, is prayer.
Plan, education, mentorship, network, grit, and prayer. These are all very good words. Some words that we've definitely seen before, some words we haven't seen before, but certainly the listeners and the readers of VCEO know that going through career transition is one of the most difficult things that we do. So I'd like to work through each of your 6 words, why you chose these 6 words, and then kind of like talk about how other service members can also use that to help them in their career transition. So let's start with plan. Can you describe the planning that you did? Let's go back to the military, perhaps even before you got out of the military. What was that planning process like for you, thinking back when you first transitioned?
Yeah, as I was reflecting about this, Jay, the even at part of the planning process needs to be a soul-searching process to really make sure that you actually do want to exit the military. Because let's face it, you have a lot of pride in what we do in our armed forces. I'll certainly, if folks are like me, have a lot of mission affiliation and just a calling, perhaps. So you just really got to make sure that you're processing the decision really well with not only yourself, but people around you. And I think it's wise to do that with not only people who have gotten out of the military, but people who decide to stay in and make it a career, right? So that was part of my planning process. Was first of all is just trying to frame up the good and bads of either both staying in and exiting. And I think when folks do that, hopefully what they'll see is that there's no wrong answer. However, there's something that might be just more right for that person. And for me, I thought I was going to make a career out of the Navy and was looking forward to doing that. But I had this itch. There was something that was telling me like, hey, maybe you're supposed to go out and lead in some other way. I knew I was going to lead. I wanted to lead in some way, and I wanted to do something impactful that made people's lives better. And so what I was doing about a year out, actually, of when I actually got out, I was doing all of that. And I realized because I wanted to lead, part of what I needed to do was to plan how I was going to lead outside of the Navy in civilian life. And I knew I wanted to lead in business. That was part of the plan. Mm-hmm. And if that was the case, I needed to understand what it was going to take to do that. And so I did the next thing, which was I went out and researched what the best business schools were, because I wanted to get a strong foundation. I knew that there were some great business schools out there. There were some okay ones, and probably some that weren't so good. And I got some good advice that you really wanted to get into the best school possible to position you as a launching pad for your new civilian career. A lot of people don't do that. A lot of people just sort of get out and go right and find jobs. For me, I felt like part of my plan needed to be the second word, which was education.
I want to dive just a little bit into planning before we push on to education, though, because you said something in here that you started your plan about a year out from when you got out.
Yes.
Did you find that that amount of time was sufficient? If you could go back and transition out of the military again, would you give yourself a year? Would you give yourself less than a year, more than a year? How did you feel that was? And thinking about that time, other service members who are about that year out, how can they maximize making their plan?
Maybe 18 months would have been a little bit better, but I wouldn't recommend, sort of getting yourself into analysis paralysis, right?
No, that's a problem.
So for me, I found that was about the right amount of time. I think if I would have spent more time, I would have been spinning.
And that's one of those things I think that's important for folks to realize. And we hear it in the military is a plan that's 80% done and executed is better than a plan that we're waiting to get to 100% and never gets done at all.
Right.
Like you got to be able to move and remembering that the best laid plans, as soon as you put into action, there's going to be something that falls apart. Was there anything in your plan that you thought was going to go one way and it went completely the other way?
Actually, yes. And so I might not be the best example for you here, Jay. So I had talked to a couple folks that were ahead of me and mentored me through this process that got accepted and went to Harvard Business School. And so I had my eyes set on, well, that's the school I want to go to. I read all about it, and that seems like that's going to position me to be able to lead in corporate America really, really well. And so I applied to that school, and I didn't apply to any other schools. So I really said, I'm going to either go to this school or I'm going to have to come up with another plan. And so that I wouldn't say that was the wisest way to approach it. But it sort of tells you where my head was. Like I was just as happy to stay in the Navy if that plan had fallen through. And I expected it to fall through, actually. and so the thing that went, you might say wrong, but in a sense really right, was I actually got accepted, and I was like, oh crap, what do I do now? Like now I really do have to make a decision and decide whether I'm going to stay in or get out, right? And so, a long story short, I knew that happened for a reason, and so I said, okay, I think this is what we're supposed to do. Let's move from sunny Florida, from Naval Air Station Jacksonville, to cold Cambridge, Boston, Massachusetts.
Yeah, quite a bit of a environment different there.
Yeah.
Well, your second word is education, and we've talked a little about kind of how that is such a fundamental part of what your plan was, and you knew you wanted to go to Harvard and got accepted into Harvard. So let's go a little bit more into why you chose this word for all of the listeners and readers of VCEO.
The two words go hand in hand, the planning and the education. So before I got accepted to Harvard, in order to even be considered, I needed to fill some gaps that I had. Right. So part of my plan / education was to go to night school while I was still in the Navy. And I took accounting classes and statistics classes. Right. And I needed to do that in order to be considered for Harvard. And frankly, I needed that anyways, because, a lot of folks might be like me who didn't have a business class in their undergrad or ever, or in their high school. and if business is going to be your route, well, you need to understand it. And so accounting is key to that. And so I just took it upon myself to go ahead and do that. And it paid off big time. I can't imagine not doing that. I already felt behind at Harvard Business School because of, everybody else had been out in the business world for 5 years or so. I've been leading for 5+ years or longer than that. But I didn't have that, that business background to fall back on as much. So that was critical as part of my plan.
Were you working at the time when you were going to Harvard, or were you a full-time student at Harvard, potentially taking advantage of GI Bill benefits or other veteran education benefits?
I ended up funding it, basically on my own with some student loans, et cetera, and a little grant. But I just wasn't as adept, which is what you're doing is so impactful, because I'm sure there would have been a way to at least get some type of assistance back then. I'm embarrassed to say, back in 1998.
You don't gotta tell the exact year. It's okay. As you're now a full-time student at Harvard, what would you say were some of the biggest challenges becoming a student? That just as other veterans, a lot of them will go to school. What were some of those big challenges that you faced right off the bat when you started going to school there?
The first one, I don't know if it's a challenge, but it's just something you have to sort of realize. And I think it's most military veterans, when they get out and go to school, they are older than most of the folks that are sitting in class with, right? And so that's just can be an interesting dynamic, right? You come with maybe more life experiences in some ways, but in other ways, you're sheltered. Like you've lived in some ways, this life where you had a schedule, and your days were planned out for you, and you knew what the mission was. Well, when you get to school, especially a business school, you have to plan out your day and decide how you're going to spend it, and work through things, even other little things like, do I live on campus or off campus? How do I navigate? Like you're doing a lot of these things on your own. But the good news is that you have this maturity, right? And I found that it was a give and take. Like I could learn a lot from my fellow classmates, a ton, because they come from all kinds of various backgrounds and business backgrounds. I used to work in manufacturing. I used to work in consulting. I used to work in investment banking. And so I would spend a lot of time talking to them. Like, what's that like? Like, I have no idea. And at the same time, I could be teaching them about leadership, right? And talking about, here's how you lead, and here's some important things about, how you set yourself to lead and being prepared and those kind of things.
Was there ever anything that really sticks out to you from any of the students, your student peers that you were with, that like you to this day you think back, wow, that was something that I'd never had seen or thought of before?
I think the biggest thing was I had no idea how many types of different careers were even available out there. I mean, there was people who were doing startups, people who were working corporate America, people who were consulting, people who were going into big nonprofits, going to education, people going into international business, people who were going to like develop a franchise, which is what I do now. I just had no idea. And so for me, it really was sort of a dual education. I was learning about business, but I was also learning about the business world. And I didn't learn about the business world in the classroom. I learned about that outside of the classroom with my classmates, which leads to even another, word here, 2 words, which is like networking for sure, right? And mentorship. So, I found some folks, like I said, that were military folks that had done this ahead of me and latched onto them on one hand for mentors. And then on the networking side, I was talking to everybody, making friends with all these folks and going out to lunch sitting with them at lunch, going out to have a beer after school or whatever it would be, just to talk about, hey, tell me about your journey. What was that like? What does it take? Like being really direct. After I got to know folks, really got to know folks, like, could you see me doing that? Or what could you see me doing now that you know me, right? So really, really, really helpful. I was also blessed that we had an Armed Forces Alumni Association at Harvard. And then in my second year, I actually was the co-president of that. And that was really, really helpful, right? Everybody on campus who was a veteran would be part of that. And man, it was like an iron sharpened iron kind of thing, right? But at the same time, we also realized that there are a lot of companies out there that are interested in us, right? They appreciated what we had been through and what we had learned, and our work ethic, our leadership, and so companies would reach out to the Armed Forces Alumni Association and ask if they could come on campus, do sessions, take us out to dinner, and talk with us, right? Which was really, really good to see. And folks need to know that you have some gaps when you come out of the military as it relates to business world, but you more than make up that with your grit. It's another word. Your leadership, your can-do attitude, your ability to withstand and tolerate pain and stress, right? All of that is so useful in the military, and then lots of companies and organizations realize that.
Trying to find a mentor can sometimes be difficult because in the military, a lot of people are in a very similar track as you. They're in similar career fields that, and you've got all that experience from junior enlisted all the way up to senior officers. There's just a breadth of experience every base you go to. You've got a lot of experience in that career field, but when you get out, it's much more ambiguous. So I'm just curious, advice for veterans as they transition out to find mentors.
Well, I think a lot of it's going to depend on sort of what environment that you're in and what you choose to do when you get out. But I know, and a lot of it's going to depend on personality. My nature was I wasn't going to be one of those people who was introduced to somebody and said, "Hey, would you be my mentor?"
Yeah.
No. So I think actually the thing that led, I think, to mentors for me was my willingness to learn and my desire to learn the business that we were in at the time. So they say it was Disney, the desire to learn the business. So I would, instead of finding mentors, I would find people who like to teach.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Or I would do things like, hey, can I just like shadow you for like an hour or two and watch what you do in the theme parks, right? And I'll come to your territory, in Epcot, where my first job was at the time, and let's walk and talk. And by doing that, you quickly find out who the folks are that, one, you like, that you trust, that have their acts together, and then you build a relationship with them, and then that can enter into a mentorship.
So tying that into mentorship and networking is so closely related on here. And we've talked a little bit about this kind of up to this point already, but just curious, how did you build and utilize your network? There was parts of it that were already there when you got out of the military. There was parts that you had when you first transitioned into Harvard, but also looking into your civilian career post Harvard, building your network there.
Yeah, I think the way that again, I wouldn't consider myself like an active networker, right? Some people just naturally do that, right? And they actually get energy from that. I don't necessarily get energy from that. But what I like to do is I like to meet people and help people at the same time. And so for me, um, I looked at networking really as a just a natural byproduct of doing business the way you should do business, which
Mm-hmm.
is you're you're open and receptive to helping, and also you're open and receptive to receiving help,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's just the premise that I have. But then um, to get more technical when it comes to some, you know, what I think are key things is if you're in a particular area of business or entrepreneurship, whatever it is, there are going to be there are going to be formal networking groups likely in that area. Like, yeah, go join that, right, and attend a meeting or two, right? Go to the conferences when there are conferences. Like I went to a couple of conferences early, um, and you're networking while you're there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then for me, uh, I try to not necessarily record, relationships, but just try to remember. And I sort of can remember people I've met over the years. And when I would get into a situation that I think I could use some help, or I would love to ask a question, or if I discovered something and I remembered about another individual that could help them, I'd send a note or a text and go, "Hey, just want you to know I met this guy who is doing the same thing you are. Here's an intro, right?" Or, "Hey,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I'm working on, I'm thinking about going into this franchising business. And have you ever? I've noticed you started a franchise as well. Like, give me a couple of tips," right? So for me, I think again, you don't have to be one of those people who we all know who they are. Like you just feel like all they want to do is grip and grin,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? Real networking is productive and natural and genuine.
How valuable would you say it is just to be able to make an introduction for someone, or as you were progressing throughout your career, to have someone make an introduction for you to introduce you to someone else?
Extremely valuable. I mean, there's, what you're doing, what somebody is doing when they're doing that is they're putting their credibility on the line because they trust you and vice versa, right? You're not going to you're not going to send somebody to a person that you don't really know is going to follow through, right? Or may not have the integrity that, you're looking for, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
it's a powerful thing because when you're doing that, everybody in that sort of triangle realizes that I trust this guy trusts this lady, and because of that, I think I can automatically trust that person too that I don't know that I'm being introduced to. And that's how it works.
Grit. What examples would you have of when you had to rely on your grit?
So an example for me at Disney was I didn't know anything about how attractions work. I didn't know how the restaurant business worked. And we had restaurants, we had attractions, we had retail shops, I had all that under my purview. I didn't know anything about that. Um, so I had to go out and learn it. And I spent, um, my day job leading, right? But I would spend extra time. I'd stay till park close a lot of times and watch closing procedures. I'd watch opening procedures. I'd sit down with my retail managers and my food and beverage managers and try to learn the business. I would get into quote unquote costume and work um, alongside our frontline cast members, right, and do the tasks and duties. Um, and by doing that, you quickly learn the business. You quickly learn it, right? And now you just apply all the other intangibles, and before you know it, you're able to achieve some of the goals that you had.
We talked about your plan, education, mentorship, network, and grit. your final word that you chose is prayer. Why did you choose prayer? What role did prayer play in your transition?
So, I know everybody's different, but for me, faith is important in my life, and I try not to make any decision that I don't feel that I'm called to do. I want to be called to something. And so, I really wanted to prayer and meditate and seek God's wisdom. And for me, it's just been a critical component of every single transition I've made. The most critical of all of everything has been that, right? And I found that when I was right on the cusp of making a decision, if I felt peace with that decision, then I knew it was the right one, right? And if I didn't feel peace, I had a sense of angst. Then for me, I knew it wasn't the right one, and God's probably pointing me in a different direction.
That's a really interesting thing about honing in to be able to find peace with these decisions, because again, career transition, it's one of the most stressful, difficult things that service members will do. There's well-laid battle plans when you're in the military, but when you get out, it's much harder to know what that is. So finding that peace, was there anything that helped, as you were focusing in on it, that would help you kind of indicate more that you were more at peace with something, even if things were unclear?
I also believe that those who know you really well, or even folks that you may not know you very well, could be positioned to breathe wisdom in your life, right? And hopefully that wisdom brings some of the peace as well, right? And so for me, in making these tough decisions and transitions, I'm putting several things together. I'm like, what are my skills and talents? One thing, well, what is my desire and heart, like my vision?
Mm-hmm.
What do people around me think and that I trust in about this particular transition or decision? And then I'm just waiting. I'm waiting to hear hopefully something, through prayer that will just solidify that. Yep, this is what's going to give me the most. This is where I'm feeling the most peace, and therefore I feel like it's the right thing. And by the way, peace does not mean this is the easiest thing. You could feel peace about doing something that's even harder than what you're doing now, right? But the
Mm-hmm.
key for me was finding that peace.
As you're talking about this, I think about there's areas where I know I can work on areas, but there's also areas where I'm fueled by passion, even though I know that's the harder route on there. And I know that that's going to be the area where I feel most fulfilled in my life. And being able to seek that out is an important thing. There's lots of different elements to consider, but that is also a big part to find something that's fulfilled. But all of this stuff that we've talked about today ultimately is to help service members, veterans, their family members with this career transition, either right when they get out or if it's years later, to help find that job for fulfillment. Is there any single piece of advice or something that you would want to say, just kind of as an open floor area for those service members, families, and veterans?
I would say that there's such great there's such great fulfillment you can get out of a career in the military. And I would tell people to don't underestimate that, right? And how really great that could be. But on the other hand, if you're feeling compelled, and to your point, you're feeling like you have a passion for something else, or there's something else that's leading you, maybe a family situation to leave, there is so much out in the world, so much, right? To look at it more as this immense opportunity and less as this thing that I got to do that's scary. Look at it as an exciting opportunity, right? And to your point, take the time to go and discover what some of those things might be, and realize that your first few years or even longer, you may stumble, right? You may not find the exact right thing. You might be bouncing around. That's okay, right? Because it will take a while for something to sink in. The second thing I would say is for folks who are really considering getting out and doing business, there's all kinds of different things to do in business that I talked about. But there are some folks who are entrepreneurs, right? Even in the military where, you had to follow directions, you're still people who had entrepreneurial mindsets. And I'd say that don't be afraid if you have an idea to go start something, right, that doesn't exist, and try out something, especially, this is an opportunity, right, to be able to do that. That you might have been thinking, or to your point, dreaming about. So, and then if you have an entrepreneurial spirit but don't have an idea, consider something like what we do, which is franchising, right? You could go and run your own business and be your own boss and grow that business, but you have the plan, you have the standards, and you have the framework, and you have somebody to come alongside you. So you can be an entrepreneur and a business owner all at one, but you're just running a concept like ours, chocolate and ice cream. Why not start there for a shameless plug? Right. There's just, I didn't think of that. Like I did not have an idea, but maybe I would have thought more about, wow, I could actually, instead of going into corporate America, I could go own something right out of the gate. And ownership is a powerful thing. Right. So maybe consider owning a franchise.
Ryan, very well said. Thank you again so much for joining us today on VCEO Magazine.
My pleasure. As we say, Kilwins, have a sweet day.
This is Veteran CEO Magazine, VCEO, where veterans lead the way.